This is Unit 1, Lecture 3, Metaphysics. The 5 branches of philosophy provide a useful way to study philosophy. These 5 branches are metaphysics, which is the philosophy of reality or being, epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge, ethics, which is the philosophy of morality, aesthetics, which is the philosophy of art, and logic, which is the philosophical study of good and bad reasoning. Allen and Springstead focus on metaphysics and epistemology, so we will too once we get to their text. But before that, we'll review each of the 5 branches as part of our introduction. So in this lecture, we'll talk about metaphysics. In the next 3 lectures, we'll consider epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics, respectively. We'll save logic for the next unit. There are also extended lectures and supplemental readings on these 4 branches, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics, and you're free to dig into those. They're not required, nor do they have voice recordings. Metaphysics has 4 major sub-branches. Theology is the philosophical study of God, from the Greek words theos, for God, and logos, which we usually translate as study of, but it means more literally logical thinking about. Then there's psychology, which is the study of the person, but specifically the psychological or spiritual side of the person. The Greek word psyche, or psyche, is often translated as mind or as spirit, and sometimes even as soul. Then there's cosmology, the study of the universe, from the Greek words for universe, which is cosmos, and logos again. And then finally, ontology, the study of being itself. This comes from the Greek word ontos, meaning being. Theology asks questions such as, does God exist? And if not, what caused us and what caused the world? If God does exist, how do we know that God exists? By reason? By faith? And is there just one God, or are there many? And what is God's relationship to the world? Did God create the world, or is God merely managing a world that has always existed? And finally, what is God's relationship to us? Did God create us? Is God still here in relationship with us? What is the nature of that relationship if such a relationship exists? And so forth. Psychology asks questions such as the problem of other minds, what is personal identity, and what is the relationship between the mind and the body? In the problem of other minds, the question is straightforward. How can I know that others have minds? I can't see your mind. I can't taste it, touch it, hear it, or smell it. The argument from analogy is the most famous answer to this question. It says that you must have a mind because you behave the way I do, and I have a mind. If I drop a bowling ball on my foot, I feel pain, which is a mental experience, and I react physically to that experience. I see you do something similar. I can conclude that you must have a mind as well. But how do I know I have a mind? How do I know my reactions aren't simply automatic or built in somehow? Also, there's no necessary connection between external behaviors and internal minds. You might drop a bowling ball on your foot and do nothing, but that doesn't mean you don't have a mind. So this analogy may be weaker than we thought. What is personal identity? What makes you you and not me, for example, or what makes me me and not you? A common Christian answer, of course, is the soul. Each of us individually has a unique soul, and that soul stays with us our entire lives. But what if I seem to exhibit more than one personality? Does that mean I have more than one soul? And is it possible for my soul to travel from one body to another in reincarnation, for example? Maybe my soul isn't my personal identity. Maybe what distinguishes me from you is my unique chain of experiences and memories. After all, it seems fair to say that none of us has exactly the same experiences or memories as anyone else. Even if you and I were the only 2 beings in the universe, I would experience you as somebody outside of me, and I would experience me internally. Maybe the concept of personal identity is false on its face. Maybe there's nothing in us that's identical all the way through our lives. Maybe at best, each of us is a unique bundle of experiences with no one of those experiences constituting our particular identity. Finally, what is the relationship between mind and body? I pick up my coffee cup because I want to. Wanting to is a mental thing, and picking it up is a physical thing. How did my mind let my body know what to do, and how did my body know to do it? In other words, given that I apparently have a non-physical mind and a physical body, how do the 2 interact, if indeed they do? 2 possible answers are monism and dualism. Monism says we are not made of 2 different kinds of stuff, but of one kind only. Both the mind and the body are made up of the same kind of stuff. Materialism says both parts of us are physical. Even the so-called mind is a physical thing we often associate with the brain, for example. Then there's idealism, which says there's no such thing as a physical world. Everything is mental, both our bodies and our minds. Then there's dual aspect theory or neutral monism that says neither our minds nor our bodies is the essence of who we are. They are simply two different ways of looking at us. Our essence remains neutral and in some sense logical, but is neither physical nor mental. Dualism, on the other hand, agrees that we're made of two different kinds of stuff, mental and physical. So dualism still has the problem. How does a non-physical mind interact with a physical body? Interactionism says that's just the way it is. Minds and bodies can interact. Mind can make the body do things, the body can make the mind do things. But how? Then there are three other dualistic theories that say it, but not quite so simply. Occasionalism says that the mind does its own thing and the body does its own thing, and God is there to see that they seem to act in harmony. So when my mind says I'd like to pick up my cup of coffee, and shortly after my body picks up the cup, it is because God made sure that both of these things happened together. Parallelism is similar to occasionalism in believing that each thing, each part of us does its own thing, the mind on the one hand and the body on the other. But parallelism says that God created the world in such harmony that the mind and body work as if they're interacting. So it's not that God is here at every moment, as the occasionalist says. It is that when God created the world, God created it in such a way that at the moment my mind said I'd like to pick up my coffee, it just so happened that my body picked it up. Finally, there's epiphenomenalism, which is a much fancier word than the concept behind it. The concept is that while we have two different aspects to us, the body and the mind, the body is an active part of us and the mind is merely passive. So the mind cannot make the body do anything. The mind just records whatever the body sends it, much like film in a camera, if we can still use that analogy. I realize that soon, with digital photography taking over, that analogy may be meaningless, especially to younger people. Cosmology asks questions about the origin and nature of the universe. We'll get to more of that as the course progresses. Finally, ontology asks questions about the nature of being itself and the principles that distinguish one kind of being from another. For example, there's eternal being. We believe that God is eternal. But there's also contingent being, us. We don't have to be. One moment we are, and another minute we're not. So what's the difference? There's the being of a predicate. Red exists, for example, only as the predicate of something else. It doesn't exist all by itself, floating around in the universe. On the other hand, there are things that exist by themselves regardless of their predicate. Think of an apple. Maybe it's red, maybe it's green, but it exists. So what is the difference between the existence of a predicate and the existence of some sort of object that's capable of receiving predicates? This is the end of the introduction to metaphysics. Next, we discuss epistemology.